Hey guys, Pat here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And I wanted to label this video today a closer look at my newly acquired tool. This is a South Bend 9-inch precision lathe. The research that I've found on this lathe that it was built in 1947, the best I can tell. And I'll put a link, or my wife will put a link in the description box below as to how I found that information out. It's an actual registry of people who have actually taken these old lathes and were curious, like I am, as to how old it was. And I like old equipment. As you guys have followed our channel, you probably found out that I'm kind of partial to older tools. Matter of fact, I think the only thing that isn't steel or metal or cast iron on this thing is the old belt. When I went and found this old lathe, my son told me about it and his boss told him about it. And so I've been wanting a metal lathe for quite some time. But the right one and the right price just hadn't come along. And I thought, well, it doesn't look like they're asking too bad a price for it. And so I went in there and checked it out, and I brought a buddy of mine in with me who is a fabricator, and he knows, he's been around the block. He's got a larger lathe than this one, and so I wanted him to go in and kind of go check it out with me. I'm not totally naive when it comes to looking things over, but he's been around lathes, so he knows a little bit more about the functionality of them and what they can and can't do. Just to back up a little bit of my educational lathes, I've had a little bit of training in metal shop in high school, but since then, that's been a long time ago, and so I don't really have extensive knowledge on what to look for, what not to look for. So I brought him along with me. We're good friends. I'm an opportunist, so when this lathe came up, it was a lathe in a estate sale, and so there was a lot of old tools there, just kind of like my shop. It's just full of junk. And the old gentleman had this lathe in the back. It was dirty, still is dirty. I plan on taking care of that in case there's some South Bend 9-inch lathe guys that are probably fixing to cuss me out because the lathe is filthy and not painted. I want to totally take it apart, clean it up, take all the old oil, all the old metal shavings and metal dust and different things out of here that's collected over the years, and the old oil that's solidified. There's a couple of books here that I got in retrospect of learning a little bit more about them. I can learn a lot of stuff on my own. Matter of fact, I've already machined a couple of projects on here. One is a little handle for my excavator, and the other is a handle for my wood stove. Our wood stove, it goes through a handle once a year, and so matter of fact, I got another one here chucked up. I'm gonna have one on standby. You can see where I've milled this down, and it's gonna fit right in to the existing hole, and I actually had to auger out the hole a little bit larger on that door. And anyway, I digress. This old lathe is in actually pretty good shape, and one way I figured that out, obviously by just observation, seeing how tight different operations were on the lathe. Tight doesn't necessarily mean it's in good shape. Tight just might mean it's seized up too, or not oiled very well. But I wiped some of this down, just a quick wipe down of the ways, and kind of clean those up a little bit. I got the carriage to really run nice on here. It's nice, and everything seems nice and tight and firm. Again, I'm going to take all this apart. Eventually, I'm taking it apart piece by piece. I'm going to do a little more cleaning on the ways and perhaps give it a paint job. But there's a couple of books that I wanted to share for you. I want to give credit where credit's due. And the lead book that I want to recommend if you guys are considering getting a 9-inch South Bend precision lathe. This book here is really resourceful. I got this on Amazon, and it's a guide to renovating the South Bend lathe, and it incorporates the 9-inch model A, B, and C. This particular model that I have is an A. The A has the quick change gearbox on it. The model B and C have the gears that you actually have to change by hand. This is called a quick change gearbox, and that changes the speeds on the lead screw for cutting threads. This book here, it's a real nice book. It's full of illustrations. This is by Ilion Industrial Services, and it's full of illustrations. And I don't know where these guys got their lathe, but this thing is like brand Spitfire new. And on their illustrations, they had that what they call geometrical flaking on the end of the lathe here, where it's not actually being touched by the carriage. You can see where it has kind of a textured look to it, and it's not really textured, it's just a finish that they have on here. And you can see where the wear on the ways are here, where it's lightly scratched. But I went through some of the highlights that they recommend if you're looking for, 9-inch South Bend lathe, that you take a look at some of the wear points on here and some of the things to look for to either shy you away from the lathe or see what kind of condition the lathe is in. And so I wanted to go ahead and take you through some of those points in case you guys are deciding to look into buying one of these lathes. One thing they point out is there is a set screw that is on the right hand side of your carriage assembly, and this set screw is to tighten your carriage in place so it doesn't move. Well, that's a square-headed screw, and what they recommend that you do is that you loosen that up and you run your carriage clear over to the right hand side or over to the tailstock area. And what that does is most of your wear on a metal lathe is going to be right up in this area right here. And most of the parts that you make are going to be short little pieces. They're going to be, anywhere from 4 to 6 inches long, or most of your wear is going to be right close in here. As you can see, this piece that I'm working on, it's not very long at all. It's only sticking out here 3 inches. Most of your V-ways and your flat way wear is going to be just right in this area right here, within a couple of feet of the headstock. So what they recommend is you run your tailstock clear to the end, like I have, and you run this clear to the end as far as you can, and then you just hand tighten this little square nut, and you just kind of get an idea of where that tightening screw is located. Then you run your carriage all the way down back to the other end of the lathe, and what they say is that if you have back to where the highest wear point is, and that's going to be right in here, and I run over here as far as where I figure the highest wear point is. So this bolt here is 5/16 or an 18 thread, so a quarter turn will indicate at about 0.014 inches or 1/1400ths of an inch. I barely got any turn on that at all, so not even close to a quarter of an inch. It's just barely loose, and so that should tell us that the ways on the lathe bed have very little wear. They have just a little tiny bit of scraping. They also claim that geometrical flaking that I was showing you on here is a 0.001 inch. So it's just barely got that flaking off of there from what I can tell. So the bed is in actual really good condition, and the argument they make, if you can look at the bed and determine the wear on the bed, that's a good indication that the rest of the machine is in in really good shape, because that means it has very little use. And so the other thing that they point you at is taking a look at the headstock. I'll give you five main characteristics or parts of the lathe that I've broken down anyway. And that is this is the bed, this is the carriage, this is the tailstock, lead screw, and headstock. And then of course you have the drive assembly, which incorporates your motor and the pulleys back here in order to drive the headstock. You have 3 different parts on the carriage, and that would be the apron, and that's this piece down here, and the tool post, and the compound slide, and up in the front here, depending on how old the lathe is, you may or may not have a quick change gearbox, so this is a pretty nice option. And the other thing that the gentleman that wrote that book talk about is also on the ways people have a tendency to take these chucks off of here and drop them on the bed, and this does has some dings on it, because it's kind of tricky sometimes when you want to take these off. It will have a tendency to get away from you and fall on the bed, but you want to just make sure that there's no severe nicks in here that might affect the wear on the carriage assembly. So another thing that they tell you to look for is the condition of the spindle here, and that's where your chuck and other adapters affixed to the headstock, is the condition of the threads on here. This is an 8 threads per inch spindle, and so this spindle is in really good shape. There's a couple little tiny dings right here on the face, but inside here is in really good shape, really smooth. And this small lathe here will take up to a 3/4 inch piece of round stock, and 3/4 inches is what I used for that handle that I made for the excavator, and this is just 1/2 inch stock, so you can run a long piece through here and just work the part on the end, and then cut off what you need to length after you're finished. They encourage you to look at the condition of this, because you don't want your chuck to get stuck on there. So when you're looking over one of these things at the headstock side, you open this little access door, and obviously you can check all of the gearing here and see what kind of wear you have on all these gears. You can rotate them and see if they turn free, see if there's any place where it hangs up. And right now I have this in neutral, so it's this right here is the forward and reverse cogs for running the quick change automatic feed for the gearbox. Now this little deal here, that's this little handle here, you have to physically loosen this. And another good thing is to make sure you have some wrenches if you can. This handle here engages the forward and reverse, and also maintains neutral for your gearbox. This engages and disengages the gearbox, but you can put that in neutral and run these gears around, make sure everything runs nice and smooth, and this one does. And the other thing to look out for is make sure that you have these 2 gears here, because this gives you the opportunity to have more speed options on your gearbox. And looking at this one here, it looks to me like there's a spacer or something in behind this gear on the banjo. They call this thing the bandro, that holds this gear, all this gear set. And I notice that I'm missing a tooth on this particular gear set right here. So at some point I might see if I can't get another one. The lathe seems to run really smooth, so it doesn't seem to be hurting anything, but it'd be good to keep my eyes open for another gear set here to replace this gear, because this tooth is broke. Other than that, everything runs fine. I'm not missing any more teeth. Up here on the spindle, this shows just a little bit of wear, but overall, for the age of this machine, it's in really good shape. I worked a lot on wood lathes, but not a whole lot on metal lathes. But what I want to do is eventually, when I take this thing down, I start learning the names of all this stuff really well, then I can share with you guys what I've learned. I mean, I can run this lathe, but I might not be able to run it to its full potential. So there are all kinds of different things that a guy can do on these if he knows how. Again, without knowing much about them, I've turned a couple of things on this so far. I hope to get more schooling on this, self-schooled by just a couple of the books that I have purchased. I'll show you a couple more books that I have. And these are South Bend, I think, reproduced books or copies. And one is How to Run a Lathe for the Beginner from South Bend Lathe Works. And the other one is How to Run a Lathe, The Care and Operation of a Screw Cutting Lathe by John Joseph O'Brien and Miles William O'Brien. And both of these books are older reprints. I think this one here was like 1943 or 1942 copyright. This will be good wintertime reading. And that refurbishing book has large print, so you can, for all of you guys that are like me and you're getting older and your eyesight is starting to get a little bit questionable, you can, this is pretty easy reading. So look at those wear points, and that'll help you to determine what to look out for on these lathes. Because you got to start buying parts like on eBay or from private sellers, then you're going to find out that parts on these things are actually pretty expensive. So I have a new belt coming. That was only like I think it was under $20 that I got a new belt coming. This belt has quite a bit of wear. It's cracked. I don't know if this is the original belt or not, but it's got some pretty severe cracks in it. It's actually broke on me once, and I put it back together again with these little clips. What I eventually want to do is I would like to repaint this. I believe this is the original color, because I don't think this drive wheel here has ever been painted, as well as the motor. I believe that's the original motor, and I believe this is the original mount for this particular lathe. But it looks like somebody has painted the main lathe itself and all of its components. Now you can look down here at the leg, and you can see the dark gray. I think that is the original color, and then the light gray is something that came in after the fact. Now, from what I understand, South Bend went through a lot of different colors, a lot of different shades of gray during the years. I believe this particular lathe underwent a few small changes, but for the most part it's been the same lathe. Production for this lathe was between the 30s and the 60s, and so it's been a pretty tried and true piece of equipment. So what I'd like to do is refinish it in this hammered finish, and this is a Rust-Oleum gray, and I really like the looks of it. This is an old planer that I refinished. I built this handle for it. I built all this for it. I really like the looks of the hammered finish, so I might go ahead and paint everything with this Rust-Oleum hammered finish. What I want to do is take one piece at a time. I think I'll take the tailstock because it's the easiest. It's you can just remove it real simply, and take this apart, take it down, take all the components out, take all the old oil and grease off of it with a solvent, and then repaint all the cast parts of it, and then hopefully make it like new. So here's a point where you guys might, if you guys are looking to buy one of these, the serial number is right here on the very end on the tailstock side of the lathe. This particular one is 3556 NAR8. On the research that I did with this, it shows that this lathe here was built in 1947. On the other side of the lathe, you're going to have the gears on this side as well. You want to make sure that you run through and check, make sure all of the gears have all of their teeth. Again, those teeth can be expensive to try to replace gear in these things. One last thing that I wanted to show to you guys is check out the slop in your carriage. Look at the teeth on your lead screw, and just making sure that everything is there. And by looking at this video and other videos that you probably see on YouTube, or especially that book that I showed you, that refurbishing a lathe. And if you guys are thinking about getting one of these little lathes, they don't take a whole lot of room up in the shop. They're pretty nice. They're pretty well built. They're very well built. And just take a few minutes, take some time, and look it over real careful and see what kind of slop it has in it. You know, parts for these lathes are pretty readily available on eBay and some of these other different sites around. I think there's forums out there that you can get on there and have question and answers, and hang out with the different guys on there and ask them questions and share your ideas and the things that you've accomplished on these little mills. The thing I like about these is that you have an automatic cross feed. You also have automatic feed that runs it forwards and backwards. You just have this clutch that engages and disengages the lead screw. So just check all the slop in that. The other thing you want to also check is make sure it's got these little oiling cups right here, and if the machine's dry, you'll probably notice it by these cups being really dry and your ways being really dry. I actually wiped all these down. I'm gonna re-oil this, but you know, just to kind of get me by for a couple little projects that I want to do before I totally tear it down. Anyway, that's a little closer look at the South Bend 9-inch Model A lathe. Well, thanks for stopping by. Take care, and God bless.